Give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money, give me money.
What better time to record a double feature than when you got the sniffles?
I challenge you to a witch's duel.
Amity Blight, do you want to go out with me?
Look at how far we've come. So a nice thing about going back to look at previous episodes with the knowledge collected from recent installments is how much you realize in hindsight. With everything that we've learned from this season and the next, it really goes to show just how considered the narrative choices in this show were. A good case in point is Coventions. Before we get to the meat of it, I just want to draw attention to one of my favorite bits in the whole show.
So flowery, so awful.
Most formidable. Hecate could only screech. Screecheth, did she? For the screeching did worsen it.
Stop it! I will literally do anything to stop this.
It's the episode where we're introduced to the Coven system, not to be confused with the Covenant system from Shadowlands.
The cycle will be broken.
This one is less worse. Basically, the covens are the magical professions of the Boiling Isles. What do you want to do with your magic? These handy dandy covens will help you find some direction in your life. Be careful though, you only get to pick one, and will only be able to do that form of magic for as long as you're a part of that coven. So choose wisely. What's that? You want to have access to all your magic? Well, you better be an utter kiss ass to the system or else your sorry ass is gonna get turned to stone. So our introduction to covens is intended to spearhead the stories of both Ida and Luce, who have very polarizing opinions on the matter. Luce, someone who is trying to find at least a little more direction in her witch training, is immediately drawn in by the prospect of covens. We see a contrast to the wide-eyed optimism later down the line, but for the time being she is enamored with the job fair. This is to prompt Ida to spout the reason for her individualist philosophy. We see exactly why she was so against the idea of magic being taught the proper way, because the coven system essentially bottlenecks your potential as a witch. Sure, there are probably witches better suited to one craft of magic than the other, as we've seen with Willow, but still, to have a lock on your magic federally mandated like this has to be a little bit stifling, especially for a frickin' Renaissance woman like Ida. Ida doesn't really come away from this episode with a change of heart. If anything, Coventions has her walking away feeling even more reaffirmed with her life choices. But that's okay. While we certainly know more about Ida by the end of the episode, it's Luce's character growth that's important. And Ida serves the purpose of telling Luce that there's no surefire way to be a real witch and that she has to be her own witch. And Luce is already set on doing just that. While she certainly listens to Ida, she has learned the most important lesson her mentor has taught her so far and focuses on forming her own opinions rather than just blindly following her individualist mantra.
So I'm going to go in there and make up my own mind, okay?
Between that and the unprecedented glyph magic, she isn't just following in Ida's footsteps, she's carving her own path with what she's learned. And what has she learned in this episode? That things in real life don't play out the way they do in her books. Again. Don't worry, Carino, you'll figure it out eventually. So yeah, Liz's character arc this episode involves establishing and subsequently resolving her rivalry with Amity. Their dynamic is intended to contrast with Ida's dynamic with Lilith. Yes, we'll get to her, keep your pants on. Coventions is another example of how the season was written with Amity's later character arc in mind. If we're going to make this girl Liz's friend, and later girlfriend, we can't have her starting off being the absolute worst like a bunch of heteros. And this episode continues with that design with portraying Luce as the instigator of this conflict. Up until she openly challenges Amity to a witch's duel, Amity is just saying and doing what she can to get Luce to just piss off and leave her alone. When the gauntlet is thrown, Amity calls Luce's bluff and she sets the terms of the unbreakable oath to ensure they never cross paths again. It's all very unfriendly, but also reactive. She's not actively seeking Luce out to taunt her about her inability to form natural magic like she's a freaking Malfoy. This culminates in Amity becoming increasingly frustrated with Luce's cheating during the duel, to her own mortification at being an accessory to Lilith's shady bullshit, to her just venting at Luce for shoving up and throwing a wrench into everything as though being a witch isn't actual work. Is Amity's whole "I worked my life to get to the top" spiel kind of undercut by the fact that she comes from a wealthy family? Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's clear that she's under a lot of pressure to succeed from her parents, which we later see is the driving conflict for a great deal of her social life. Maybe the Boiling Isles are like ancient Rome, where even if you come from an exceptional family, you still have to do exceptional things to be regarded. And hey, we didn't know at this point in the show that Amity does come from wealth, but either way, at face value, it's rather difficult to ignore Amity's privilege in this scenario, especially when she is decidedly white and Luce is not. Of course, Luce wouldn't be her perfect self if she didn't immediately try to reach out to Amity after the duel duel. While they don't exactly establish a rapport here, she makes it clear to Amity that she also has to work hard to become a witch, prompting Amity to unbind the oath and free Luz from the condition of abandoning her apprenticeship. Hardly a solid foundation on which to build a friendship, but it does nonetheless contrast against how Ida and Lilith leave things by the end of the episode. Speaking of which, so, funny story, when I first watched the episode with Lily and a bunch of friends, when we get to the part where Lilith is introduced and we see the tension in Ida's face at the sight of her, we collectively go, oh, are they jilted exes? Then Lilith calls Ida's sister not one scene later, and we all felt like such fools. We all got Return of the Jedi'd in like 3 minutes. In any case, I have opinions on Lilith in general. Very few of them are actually flattering on the grounds of how her character was handled all throughout. As of this video, Lilith's collective character arc is perhaps the clumsiest thing Dana and the crew have done so far. Perhaps the one thing in the show I can call unmistakably bad. In this episode, meanwhile, she's fine. She's a serviceable antagonist and a foil to Ida. Everything Ida isn't, Lilith prides herself on being. A prim, proper woman of the establishment.
It wasn't easy for me to rise to the top. I also started from humble beginnings.
Like me?
Now I have the highest honor of enforcing the Emperor's will.
Oh yeah, Lilith, I'm sure it was a lot of hard work cursing your baby sister because you couldn't take her in a fair fight. Yeah, whew, that takes it out of you. But yeah, not a whole lot I could say about Lilith other than the fact that she makes a good antagonist in this episode. And honestly, she probably should have just stayed a villain all throughout, but that's a discussion for another time. I will say though that in this episode, Ida and Lilith have some serious Dante and Virgil energy, and I am here for it.
The path is clear for us to rule. What did you just say? The path is clear for us to rule.
Hey look, it's the one episode in the entire show that gives Willow character development. You heard me. The only one. Understanding Willow and Wing It Like Witches have Willow as the vehicle for Amity and Luz's development specifically, but Hooty's Moving Hassle is the only one that gives Willow proper development. Do the math. Sure, the conflict of the A-plot is technically Luz lying to Ida about the Midnight Conjuring, but very little comes of that in the terms of consequences. The real emotional weight comes in the form of Willow wanting to feel the joy of camaraderie and wanting to show Amity and her clique just how better off she is now. Willow's desire for catharsis is far from unreasonable. The fact that Amity's social circle has been bullying her for years was justification enough. Then we find out how her and Amity used to be friends before she ditched Willow. That's baggage on top of baggage right there. Losing a friend to another clique, especially over how we develop differently as kids, anyone who's gone through that can definitely relate to Willow here. That anger and bitterness and want for catharsis. And what's great is that apart from the life-threatening shenanigans that occur, Willow is never villainized or scolded for wanting to show off. The closest we get to that is Luz encouraging her by saying that she's already a powerful witch and that she has nothing to prove to anyone. We get to see the context of Willow and Amity's falling out later, and it is indeed a touch more complicated than Willow first thought, but that doesn't take away from this episode in the slightest. And it's double great because Amity's clique finds out that they animated a whole house anyway, while they couldn't even get a doll to move. Thanks, social media. Of course, this episode also has a fantastic B-plot. Ida runs out of the elixir that keeps her from getting fluffy, and she can't get a refill in time. Mode. So she goes on to be extorted by a fucking price gouger. We already know that Ida's curse is treated like a chronic illness, though recent episodes really stretch the bounds of that prospect. But here we see the idea presented in a long overdue light and how society responds to people with these kind of needs. Sure, this entire conflict starts as a result of Ida's obsession with Hexam Hold'em, and she hence learns to curb that addiction, but let's not pretend that her story in this episode doesn't have an actual villain in it. Tibbles, the narmy fuck he is, has no qualm taking advantage of a woman who needs her medicine. Hell, the episode itself takes a shot at capitalism. How many people are suffering and dying from diabetes right now in the US because pharmacies are price gouging on insulin? I'll answer that for you. A fuck ton. The more blatantly we expose this predatory bullshit, the more pressure these assholes are under to fix it. Expose the truth. Expose it. And, well, that's kind of it. Yeah, sad to say there's not really a whole lot more about this episode I can talk about. It's good. Just very straightforward. It's part of the reason this video is a double feature. We're gonna get a few more of those in the future. I'll be surprised if we can get more than a paragraph out of Once Upon a Swap. Hooty's Moving Hassle is a good episode with what they did with Willow and Ida, and it makes me all the sadder that this is the only true Willow episode we've gotten. At this point, Willow's thoughts and feelings are explored for the sake of other characters' development rather than her own. Hell, as of the first half of season 2, Gus has gotten more development than she has. No offense intended, sweetie, you're a shining star and I love you.